Okay. So the question that I've asked myself is, what should licensing and regulation look like to accelerate the deployment of fusion power around the world? So this is not the technical details. Some of my colleagues have given you some of the technical details about the tritium. And Patrick has given you a very nice structured approach as to how you come up with a regulatory framework. I'm kind of going to give you a meta framework for the framework, okay? Now, I've done this thinking together with 3 colleagues. One of them is Sihila, who's here in the room. The other 2 are a former director of the IEA and a retired director of OPEC. Now, I'll give you one very simple argument, and then I'll give you our 7-point plan. So the one very simple argument is something that you've now just heard before. So I used to teach a course on nuclear power plants to graduate students. So what I teach my students is that a fission reactor has 4 key components. It has fissionable material, it has a moderator, it has control rods, and it has cooling. As a matter of fact, those of you that have seen the Chernobyl TV series, there is a scene where Legasov explains what makes a nuclear reactor, and he basically tells people the same thing. Okay. Now, in a nuclear fission reactor, you have high radiation during and after the operation, and you have high radioactivity, okay, at all times. There's a thing that's not on the slide that you also have in a fission reactor, and that is the fissionable inventory that in principle allows you to build nuclear weapons. I'm just saying that word that nobody else has said, but that is actually in there, right? There's uranium-235 in any normal uranium reactor that if you go and enrich that, there's enough in one reactor to build 1 bomb, basically, okay? Now, tritium is a dangerous material, but you cannot build a tritium bomb just with tritium. You can pile as much of it together as you want to, it will not go boom. Okay, just that cleared. Now, if you look at the key components of a particle accelerator, you have strong magnets, you have radio frequency electromagnetic fields, you have cryogenics, and you have vacuum. That basically makes your modern particle accelerator. You also got some radiation, but only during the operation, and low radioactivity, only after it's been running for a while, kind of. And if you look at the components of a magnetic field, confined fusion energy device, then you have strong magnets, radio frequency electromagnetic waves, cryogenics, and vacuum. From a point of view of somebody who builds particle accelerators, and I think we have some in the room that have done this before, a fusion device is a really, really bad particle accelerator, where they got everything wrong in the design, right? But like all the dimensions of the components are wrong, but they're all the same components. And that's why this should be regulated like, that's why fusion energy should be regulated basically like particle accelerators. That is the route that the US are taking and the UK are taking. That is also, as of recently, the route that Germany is taking, by the way. Now, we've written a paper, the source is down there, it's online since 1 week, okay? So if you want to go ahead and download that. Now, I'll give you our 7-point plan as to how one could do regulation and licensing so that it accelerates the deployment or at least not delays it. The one thing would be a core licensing agreement between those countries that produce fusion power plants to accept one another's licensing. There is such an agreement for passenger airplanes between the US and Europe. So if Boeing builds a new model of Boeing, that gets technically licensed in the US, and in the European Union, that is an administrative act with no further technical review. It's a rubber stamping of a document. Vice versa, if Airbus builds a new plane, that gets technically checked in the European Union, and in the US, that is an administrative act that that plane can also fly from Dallas. Okay? That speeds things up. At the moment, what we're seeing is that the countries that think that they're going to be the first ones to build fusion power plants are ramping up regulation, and they come up with licensing processes. Now, if we let that process run, they'll eventually talk to one another and say, hey, Shouldn't we be doing this where I'm accepting what you're saying and you're accepting what I'm saying, and that'll be better for everybody? Now, what we're saying is, if we really actually want to speed this up, get the politicians to talk to one another and have this conversation now, so that by the time actual power plants are getting built and the actual frameworks are there, they're mutually accepted. We can already start having that conversation. That will be speeding things up. Now, global network of agreements means if you're a country that is a developing country and you have no capacity for the regulation of a fusion power plant, you can just opt into that licensing agreement. And you can say, we're not licensing those. We're accepting your licensing from the US and from the EU, and that'll be fine, and the UK. And that'll be fine. That goes with a global regulator function. So you want to sell fusion power plants also to developing countries. They will not have a regulator. For them to set up a regulator will tend to take at least 10 years. That's 10 years where you're waiting to sell one to them, although they might want to buy one. So give them the opportunity to outsource their regulation to a global organization that does the regulation for them while they're ramping up their capacity. That goes with safeguards. Now, this was only very briefly mentioned. We have a massive source of 14 MeV neutrons, which is what any fusion reactor is. You can take some not yet fissionable material, place it in a strategic location, and turn it into fissionable material. Right? You basically just need a bunch of thorium, which you can buy from India, and you put it in a box, you set it there, you make uranium-233, and Bob's your uncle. So you need somebody to go and just walk by and check that there are no boxes with material that is being bred to be fissionable. And if you want to sell this to every country around the world, you're also selling this to countries that you're not inherently find trustworthy. So you want somebody to go and be safeguards. Okay? That is a necessary function. Capacity building is also something that needs to be done. We just talked about that before. I'll skip over that here. Public outreach, we also mentioned before that that is necessary. There isn't really anybody who has a mandate to do that and a budget to do that, but it is a necessary thing that should be done. And all these functions should be taken over by an organization, and which we're calling the Global Organization for Fusion Energy. Whenever there's a new thing that needs a global organization, such a global organization is created. There's IRENA and C4All. They were recently created for renewable energies. There's just a global organization for water that was created this week in Saudi Arabia. Like, whenever there is a need for a global organization, it is created. There are two organizations that exist that could take over this role. One is the IAEA. They, for example, already have all the experience with safeguards that you're looking for. And the other one is ITER. But ITER is a members-only organization. And what it would take for either one of these two organizations to want to take over this role would be the will of their member states. Because they, as international organizations, respond to what their member states want. So if the member states of these organizations that are now planning to build fusion power plants would decide to go and approach one of these two organizations and say, hey, we actually think we need you guys to do this, the organization will not say no. They will just say, and are you going to fund that? Okay? So this is our 7-point plan proposal. Have a look. Let me know what you think. Thank you.